However, globalization has also positive effects. One in particular is the one on world poverty. This graph, and now you should be able to see it, shows you over time the evolution of people living in absolute poverty, which is the red part of the graph, and people not living in absolute poverty, which is the blue part of the graph. What you can see basically is that in 1820 there was basically around 1 billion people living the planet, and out of these 1 billion people, around 95% was people living in absolute poverty, was all green, all red. About 5% of the people were not living in absolute poverty. This suggests a huge inequality, okay, in the society. If you go to 1950, so just after the Second World War, the situation had improved already, but not significantly. Okay, there was around 70% of the people in the planet living in absolute poverty, and around 30% of the people not living in absolute poverty. And these people not living in absolute poverty was basically concentrated in Western countries. Okay, so Europe, US, some part of Russia, and some part of the countries belonging to the so-called Commonwealth, so Australia, South Africa, and things like that. Okay, all the rest of the world was made by people where, by the largest part, whom largest part was living in absolute poverty. As you can see, the situation now has changed a lot. Okay, if you go to 2011, which is the end of this graph, you see that the situation has completely reversed. Nowadays, we are around 70 billion people. I don't know what happened here, so sorry, wait 1 second, I have to enter the chat again. Why? Wait, I don't know if you have problem with the chat, but it says that the service is now the service is now it should work. Ora dovrebbe funzionare di nuovo. Ok, great. Okay, so I was saying around 7 billion people we are in the world, but of course now the largest majority, around again 70% of the population, is not living in absolute poverty, and only 30% is living in poverty. So this has changed a lot. So it has grown a lot, the share of the population not living in poverty, and it has reduced over time the share of the population living in poverty. This was a result of globalization, in part of globalization, and in particular, it was the result of one specific event which happened, and you can clearly see it if you look at this point here in the graph, where the share of the population living in absolute poverty start to decline. Okay, this specific point in time happened one important thing. Probably some of you may guess it. You want to guess it? Try. If somebody has a right guess, can just try to say it, so that I can see if there are people listening to me. So, does anybody know what happened around this period between 1950 and 1990 that made this reversal in the trend of the population living in poverty? Anybody wants to guess? You can guess also in the chat if you want. No one knows? Okay, I will say it. Yes, try. Se vuoi, sì. Okay. Notice, however, that this is it refers to the world population. Okay, it's not Italy. In the 50s, there was an important boom in Italy, true, which has had an important effect on Italian people living in absolute poverty. But this is a world. These are world data. Okay, so it's the entire globe. So what happened in the world during this period, in particular during the 70s, if you want, that led to this change, that brought this change? Somebody has this micro on, so somebody wants to try. Jacopo, is it clear now what I said? Because you just wrote in the chat that it wasn't clear. Is it clearer now, the question? Okay. You want to try? No. Okay. We are getting closer, in particular, not really the end of the Cold War, but something happened in a country which is, in these days, is at the center of the debate in the world. Which is a country that nowadays is at the center of the debates for the COVID issue. China, right? What happened in the 70s in China? Do you know? Anybody knows? Yeah, there was first a famine, but then there were, so basically, they implemented a set of reform. Is it called the period of the Chinese reform, where basically they opened the Chinese economy to foreign investments, and in particular, they opened it to international trade. So China started to trade with the rest of the world, to export goods in other countries, and other countries started to export goods in China and to make investments in China. Notice that I don't remember now the size of the Chinese population, but at that period, but clearly the Chinese population it's the biggest country in the world, so it, of course, a change in one particular country can have significant effects even for world statistics. And in the case of the distributions of people living in poverty, this is exactly what happened. So China opened the economy, basically, if you want, to capitalism, moving from a communist organization to a capitalist organization, even though still there is a very important role played by the government. But this had a huge effect on the number of people living in poverty, because the number of Chinese people living in poverty declined significantly starting from that period. And this, of course, is also a positive result of globalization.